Mrs. Wells straightened up, her gaze sweeping across the classroom as usual. But this time, it didn't pause on the familiar names, not on the white students seated in the front row. It stopped on Malik, the only black student in the class. No one in the class said a word. Malik thought he might be mistaken. But no, Mrs. Wells was really looking at him. Directly.
No deflección.
No glance that slid past him like all the other times. Malik Jordan, she said, her voice neither loud nor harsh, yet it made the whole class pause, as if time itself had been compressed. His heart pounded, not out of fear, but out of surprise. For the first time all school year, his name had come from Mrs. Wells's mouth. Not for roll call, not for a reprimand. You tell me, Mrs. Wells continued, her eyes still fixed on Malik, why were black soldiers who volunteered to fight in the Civil War considered a turning point in American history? The classroom seemed to shrink slightly. Jalen leaned over and whispered, almost under his breath, "She's talking to you." Malik didn't respond for a few seconds. He looked back at Mrs. Wells. Part of him wanted to be suspicious. Was this a trap? A setup, just like the others, where he'd be challenged and cornered. But in her gaze, he saw something different. She was truly waiting, but not to catch a mistake. She was waiting to listen. Malik took a deep breath and set his pen down. Because it was the first time black people weren't just demanding the right to live, he said, voice steady and low. They were claiming the right to fight, and die, for a country that had never truly seen them as its own. One sentence. Not long. Not flowery. The class was silent. Mrs. Wells stayed silent even longer. Then she nodded. "Thank you," she said. Just 2 words. But for the first time, Malik didn't feel invisible. Malik Carter sat by the window, tapping his pencil softly against the edge of his notebook like he was marking a rhythm only he could hear. It wasn't out of nerves, just habit, a way to stay grounded. His mother always told him to stop, but he never really tried. Maybe because it helped still his mind amid the daily noise of Jefferson High School in Little Rock, Arkansas. Up front, Mrs. Karen Wells, with her tidy bun and tasteful gray dress, flipped through her lesson plan. She taught 6th grade for nearly 2 decades and had a reputation for being strict, fair, but only in the eyes of students she favored. For Malik, things were different. He'd never been called on, not even when his hand shot up first. When he answered correctly, she moved on without acknowledgement. When he was wrong, rarely, she paused just long enough to savor it. No one had to tell Malik. He knew exactly where he stood in Mrs. Wells's eyes. "She legit never looks at you," Jalen Moore had whispered the day before, sitting beside him.
Like you're invisible or something. Malik shrugged.
Maybe I am. But today felt different. Mrs. Wells glanced his way more than usual. Her look wasn't wary, it almost felt expectant. Class began. The topic was part of the Civil War unit. Malik took careful notes, not expecting much, just the usual invisibility. Then, the unexpected happened. "Malik," Mrs. Wells's voice rang out, clear and crisp, "you can answer this one." The whole class turned.
Malik blinked.
Did she just say his name? He sat up straighter, eyes flicking to the board. General Sherman's March to the Sea was a military campaign aimed at destroying the South's resources and morale, he answered. Mrs. Wells frowned. Not bad. Her voice was flat. But the class wasn't. A few students exchanged looks, clearly surprised. Jalen nudged Malik, his face saying, "What the hell is going on?" The class went on, but something had shifted. For the first time, Malik wasn't invisible. And Mrs. Wells, instead of ignoring him, was watching him now, but not with kindness. Then, just as the dismissal bell was about to ring, she struck. "Malik," she said as students began packing up, "stay behind for a moment." Malik packed his books into his backpack slowly. A few classmates still glanced his way as they filed out, their silence more pointed than words. The way they looked back, half curious, half speculative, made the air feel heavier, thicker somehow. Mrs. Wells stood behind her desk, arms crossed, her expression practiced into perfect neutrality. "You mentioned your grandfather earlier," she said, voice steady. Malik frowned slightly. "Yes. Why?" "You said he was a musician?" "He played piano." "Jazz," Malik replied, still gripping the backpack strap, a twinge of instinct telling him something was off. A flicker of a smile touched Mrs. Wells's lips, not a warm one, but something calculated. Then I assume you know how to play a little yourself. Malik stayed quiet. The answer was yes, but he didn't want to say that out loud. The way she looked at him, like she was crafting something, made him feel wary, not proud. Good, she said, her tone oddly satisfied, like she'd just confirmed a theory. Then she pointed to the corner of the classroom, where an old dust-covered upright piano sat forgotten. Tomorrow, you'll play something for the class. Malik raised his eyebrows. Why? Why not? She tilted her head, voice dripping sweet like syrup, but the edge in her eyes remained sharp. You said you had talent. This is your chance to show it. Malik didn't answer. But inside he knew, this wasn't an invitation, it was a trap. He walked out of the classroom without another word, his steps slow like he was carrying a weight in his chest. Mrs. Wells didn't need to shout, didn't need to insult. All she had to do was smile and offer a chance, and if he declined, they'd say he was bluffing. If he messed up, it would be entertainment, ammunition for her to dismiss him further. But Mrs. Wells had miscalculated one thing. Malik wasn't afraid of the piano. The next day, Malik walked into class with a calm expression, but inside, an ocean of nerves churned beneath the surface. Rumors had already spread through the halls that morning. Whispers and stifled giggles trailed behind him. Malik's supposed to play piano today. Does he even know how? Mrs. Wells is probably setting up for a good laugh. Malik didn't respond to any of it. He simply took his seat, pulled out his notebook like always, and tapped his pencil lightly on the desk, a quiet rhythm to steady his breath, to keep himself anchored. The class dragged on slowly with a lecture on the American Civil War. But everyone, even the teacher, knew that wasn't what they were really waiting for. With 15 minutes left in the period, Mrs. Wells closed her book and announced crisply, "As I mentioned yesterday, today, we have a special presentation." She turned and gestured toward the piano tucked into the back corner of the room. "Malik, if you would." The room fell silent, as if all the air had been sucked out of it. Malik stood slowly, walking toward the old piano with deliberate steps. Each stride felt like it pressed through layers of doubt. He pulled out the bench and sat. The keys were worn, many yellowed with age. He rested his hands on them and closed his eyes for a beat. The instrument wasn't perfect, but Malik was ready. Without a word, he began to play. The opening notes were soft and slow, a gentle melancholic blues, an old tune his grandfather used to play as shadows stretched across the porch in the late afternoon. Then gradually, he picked up pace, shifting into a complex jazz improvisation. The notes danced, stretched, twisted, touching every quiet corner of the classroom. Each hand told its own story, one laying the foundation, the other weaving emotion through melody. This wasn't a performance. It was a declaration that talent does not need permission to exist. Mrs. Wells's face slowly shifted. Her poised neutrality gave way to surprise, then faint unease. As for the classmates who had snickered that morning, now they watched wide-eyed, jaws slack. No one moved. No one dared interrupt. When Malik struck the final chord, a deep resonant note like a breath held at midnight, the classroom remained hushed for a heartbeat. Then, applause. From the back corner. Then spreading. Tyrese, the classmate beside him, let out a soft whistle. "Man, you really kept that hidden, huh?" Malik stood, returned to his seat without a bow, without a smile, just lifted his head high and stayed silent. There was no need to say anything. The music had already spoken for him. The classroom still hummed with the echo of Malik's melody. But Mrs. Wells, known for her clear voice and unshakable demeanor, stood quietly at her desk, her hand resting on its edge as if steadying her emotions. Finally, she spoke, her voice lower than usual. That was an unexpected performance. Silence followed. No one laughed. No one spoke. Everyone understood. It wasn't that she lacked words of praise, it was that she didn't know how to say them without losing face. Unexpected was as close as she could get to admitting she'd misjudged Malik. Malik looked straight at her, unflinching. She asked, hesitantly, "Where did you learn that?" "My grandfather taught me," Malik replied, short but firm. Mrs. Wells nodded. For a moment, something softened in her eyes. But then, almost instinctively, she straightened her back and shifted her tone. "All right then. Let's return to the lesson." American history waits for no one. The words were spoken, but no one was really listening anymore. Brandon, a student known for cracking jokes, tilted his head and muttered, loud enough for the room to hear. You just watched a whole performance and all you got is unexpected? Seriously, Ms. Wells. A few chuckles broke out, not mocking Malik, but releasing the tension that had ballooned in the room. Mrs. Wells glanced sharply at Brandon, ready to scold, but then said nothing. And that silence? That was the strangest part of all. Malik sat still, breathing steady. He didn't add anything. He didn't need to. He had already spoken, with every note he played. The class moved on, but the air wasn't the same. Mrs. Wells tried to resume the lesson, her tone clipped as she read from the textbook. But every time her eyes passed over Malik, there was a brief hitch, barely noticeable but real. His classmates no longer treated Malik like a shadow. Tyler, the only one who had ever really talked to him, gave his desk a quick tap after class. You're playing again tomorrow, right? And this time, you gotta teach me a bit. Malik just smiled. And Mrs. Wells? When the students had mostly cleared out, she rose, walked to the old piano, and ran her fingers gently over the dusty keys. Not to play, just to touch. And for the first time all school year, Malik saw her not as the one in control of the room, but as someone who had just been forced to confront herself. The next day, Malik walked into class like he always did, quietly, no waves, no greetings. But something had changed. Not in him, but in how others looked at him. The same eyes that used to glance past Malik as if he were invisible now paused, curious, surprised, even a little unsure. Madison, the girl who usually sat in the back hiding her phone inside her notebook, looked at him like he'd just stepped out of a movie scene. Tyler, of course, couldn't hold it in. He slapped Malik's hand as he sat down and grinned wide. You shut her up, man. I didn't even know Ms. Wells could blush. Malik gave a small smile, but tension still lingered in his chest. He knew it wasn't over yet. Class passed like any other day, or at least it seemed to. Ms. Wells didn't mention yesterday, didn't bring up the piano, and didn't look at Malik too long. But her silence said more than words. As the bell rang, Malik packed up. He was about to step out the door when her voice came again. Malik, stay a moment. He turned, heart dipping a little. Ms. Wells stood next to the old piano. You played well, she said. Her voice wasn't soft, but it had lost its chill. Very well. Malik nodded. Thank you. I misjudged you, she said plainly. It was clear she'd had to work to say it. Not because you lacked anything, but because I never really looked. Malik didn't answer right away. He stepped closer to the piano, touched the lid of the keys gently. Sometimes, he said, you don't need to say anything. The sound speaks for itself. They stood there for a few seconds, no bitterness, no speeches, just a moment where authority met humility, quiet and necessary. Then Malik turned and walked into the hallway. Tyler was waiting, waving like crazy. Malik knew, from that day forward, he wouldn't be just a shadow in the classroom anymore. He was someone worth hearing, not because he shouted, but because he knew when to stay silent, and when to play loud. The next day at school, everything seemed as usual, the hurried footsteps in the hallways, the cheerful laughter echoing across the yard, and the familiar bell signaling the start of class. But for Malik, everything felt wrapped in a different kind of light. When he walked into history class, something unexpected happened. Madison, who had never spoken to Malik before, pulled a chair over and sat beside him. Have you studied the chapter on Reconstruction yet? She asked, a little awkwardly. Malik nodded. Yeah, I've read it. There was a brief silence, then she added, what you did yesterday, that was amazing. You played like a professional. Malik shrugged. I just did what my grandfather taught me. Madison smiled softly. Yeah, but you made the whole class fall silent. Even Ms. Wells didn't interrupt. That's rare. Class began, but Malik felt lighter inside. Not because of the compliment, but because, for the first time, someone was speaking with him instead of around him. At lunch in the cafeteria, something even stranger happened. Two more classmates, Andrew and Lila, dragged their chairs over to sit near Malik and Tyler. Can you teach us the part you played yesterday? Lila asked. Yeah, I want to learn those finger moves, Andrew chimed in, eyes bright. Malik blinked for a moment. In the past, no one had asked him anything beyond, "Did you finish the homework?" or "Can I borrow a pen?" But now they wanted to hear him, they wanted to learn from him. "Sure," Malik replied, and for the first time all school year, he smiled without holding back. That afternoon, he stopped by the music room before heading home. The old piano still sat in the corner, but now it was no longer covered in dust. Someone, probably Ms. Wells, had cleaned the keys. Malik sat down, gently pressed a low note. A sound rang out, deep, steady, perfectly tuned. He played a short piece, not for anyone to hear, no audience, just him and the piano. But this time, he wasn't trying to prove anything. He wasn't bracing himself. It was just Malik, and the music that could fill a day. On Friday, Ms. Wells's class began like usual, but it was the unspoken things that caught people's attention. Malik entered, and for the first time in months, Ms. Wells looked him in the eye. Not with control. Not with scrutiny. Just a real look, plain and simple. "Good morning, Malik," she said calmly. He nodded. "Good morning." Just 2 lines. But everyone in the room noticed. Tyler raised his eyebrows as if to say, "Did she really just greet you?" The lesson moved on with a lecture on the civil rights movement, Rosa Parks, the Montgomery bus boycott, the power of silence in resistance. Malik took notes attentively, but his focus wasn't just on the lesson. It was on what happened next. Ms. Wells stopped at the front row seat, the one always empty when Malik raised his hand. "Does anyone want to share personal thoughts about silence in activism?" she asked, her eyes sweeping the room. A few hands went up, Madison, Andrew. But then, unexpectedly, she said, "Malik." The room paused. A few students turned fully in their seats to look at him. Malik blinked, heart pounding, not from fear, but from the sheer rarity of the moment. He stood up slowly. Sometimes, silence is the only thing you've got. But if you use it the right way, it becomes the one thing people can't ignore. The room fell silent. Not a whisper. Ms. Wells nodded, short, but sincere. "Thank you," she said. Malik sat down. Tyler gave him a light pat on the shoulder, as if to say, "You're at the center now." After class, Malik packed his things as usual. As he stood to leave, Ms. Wells spoke softly. "Malik." He turned back. She was standing by the piano, her hand resting on its lid. "That piano. The sound from that day still echoes with me. Thank you for sharing it." Malik looked at her, this time not through the filter of bias. "Not everyone's willing to listen," he said. "Not everyone's ready to wake up from their habits," she replied. They both smiled, small, but genuine. Tomorrow, he would play again. Not to rebel, not to prove a point, but because music was where Malik never needed to be chosen, because there, he always had a seat. Friday morning, Ms. Wells's class began as usual, the same quiet routine. But what wasn't said was what caught everyone's attention. Malik walked in, and for the first time in months, Ms. Wells looked him in the eye. Not with control. Not with suspicion. Just a real look, nothing more, nothing less. "Good morning, Malik," she said, her tone calm. He nodded. "Good morning, ma'am." Just 2 lines. But everyone in class noticed. Tyler raised his eyebrows as if to say, "Did she really just greet you?" The class continued with a lesson on the civil rights movement, Rosa Parks, the Montgomery bus boycott, and silence as a form of resistance. Malik listened intently, taking notes, but what caught his focus wasn't in the lecture. It was when Ms. Wells stopped near the front row, the seat usually left unacknowledged whenever Malik raised his hand. "Would anyone like to share personal thoughts on the power of silence in protest?" she asked, her gaze sweeping the room. Several hands went up, Madison, Andrew. But then, unexpectedly, she said, "Malik." The whole room froze. A few students turned completely to look at him. Malik blinked, heart pounding, not from fear, but because this had never happened before. He stood slowly. Sometimes, silence is all you have. But if you use it the right way, it becomes the one thing no one can ignore. The room fell silent. Not a whisper. Ms. Wells nodded, short, but unmistakably genuine. "Thank you," she said. He sat down. Tyler patted his shoulder lightly, as if to say, "You're at the center now." After class, Malik packed his things like usual. As he stood to leave, Ms. Wells called softly. Malik. He turned. She was standing by the piano, her hand resting gently on the lid. That piano, the sound from that day still echoes with me. Thank you for sharing it. Malik looked at her, for the first time not through a lens of judgment. Not everyone's willing to listen, he said. Not everyone's brave enough to wake themselves from habit, she replied. They both smiled, small but real. Tomorrow, he would play again. Not to protest, not to prove himself, but because music was a place where Malik never had to be chosen. Because there, he always had a seat. The following week didn't change everything overnight. No drums, no public apology from Ms. Wells, no photo of Malik on the honor board. But what did change was how people looked at him, and how he saw himself. In the hallway, the glances he received weren't blank or mocking anymore. They were the looks of people who had judged wrong, and were learning again. At recess, Madison, who had barely acknowledged him before, sat down beside him and asked, "Do you write music? Or just play?" "Both," Malik replied. "You should post it online. Like, let people hear it." He just smiled. "I'm still playing for myself first." And Ms. Wells? She didn't transform overnight. But she began calling on Malik more often, asking his opinion during class, even, once, smiling when he got an answer right. She was no longer the one holding all the power, but someone learning how to begin again. And Malik, instead of seeing it as a victory, quietly accepted it as a lesson in patience, and the strength of not staying silent. One weekend afternoon, Malik sat in the living room, the old piano his grandfather once played still in its usual corner. The keys were worn, but still rang with memory. He placed his fingers on the keys, but this time, not to play something old. He played something of his own, a melody incomplete, but full of feeling. It was like a letter to anyone who'd ever felt invisible. Like a promise, that if someone doesn't see you, make sound until they can't ignore you. Because sometimes, music isn't about entertainment. It's a declaration, an existence, a voice when the world tries to silence you. The following week, during a school assembly, his name was called out, special performance, Malik Graham. He stepped onto the stage. No bowing, no shrinking. Placed his hands on the keys. And when the music began, the entire auditorium fell silent. No one dared to breathe. No one doubted anymore. Because in that moment, Malik didn't need anyone to call his name. He had already claimed his place, with the sound he made.